Hey everybody, this is Tim with the University of Vinyl. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for tuning in again. I wanted to jump on before we get into today's video and just give everybody a brief warning that it is going to be a little bit of a deep dive and it is quite long. So if you have time, I'd appreciate you guys checking it out, and if you don't have time right now, maybe catch up later. But hope you enjoy it, and here we go. Like the best novels, the great albums, they have a story arc that they're trying to put across. I remember back in the days, they recently killed the iPod finally. Apple is no longer making iPods. But I remember being kind of excited when they announced a special price that you could actually purchase an entire album. Because I wasn't really into just downloading 1,000 songs into an iPod. I'm all about the album. And the album is why we have vinyl records, right? I mean, vinyl records are a media storage device for an artist's vision. And an album can take various shapes, but typically an album is a work of art. It is a time and place. It's what that artist had in mind, what they worked on and decided to produce and release into the world. It was a statement in 1973. For the listener, they're presented with an opportunity to listen to a fantastic side of music with a natural break whereby they have to get up and turn the record over and kind of finish, hopefully in one sitting, what that artist had intended this full statement to be. That's the appeal of an album. And albums thrived and are still thriving today on the vinyl format. But the vinyl record had limitations. Again, maybe 22 minutes aside. There's only so many songs and so much music that can actually physically fit and audibly play on a vinyl record. Artists had to be really, really focused. They had to think about editing themselves in order to kind of come up with a cohesive statement. And then we have to think about sequencing. How does the artist want to present this group of songs out to the world? What story do they want to tell?
Also sequencing. If you're downloading tracks or listening to playlists that somebody puts together, that's all fine. But albums, certainly in my era, where there was an order to each side. It would be like cutting the second act out of The Godfather.
When we came to the CD age, sequencing of albums kind of fell by the wayside. There was an opportunity with all this extra space for more and more songs. Of course, someone in marketing probably said, hey, if we can really fill this 72 minutes, this disc full of music, we can actually charge $18.98 for that. Now, I think it was George Martin who actually thought, well, the most important songs on an album are the first song. You've got to have something that's going to grab the listener. The fourth song, you have to kind of keep things engaged. The last song on side one needs to be a thoughtful piece that kind of supports the whole side one. Side two, you need to have another transitional track at the beginning of side 2 that's going to carry on from side 1, carry on the themes and the ideas. So it's a transitional song. And then finally, you have to have an important song that's going to close out the album that maybe has a little weight, a little heft, some thoughtfulness to it that will keep the listener engaged. It will pique the listener's interest. It will draw a conclusion to the album, to the recorded works, and maybe it is something that will leave the listener wanting for more. So they're going to want to maybe catch that band on tour, and they're going to maybe also look forward to, well, what's the next thing that this artist has to say? I'm looking forward to the next album. Today, I want to talk about 10 albums and how they really benefited from the vinyl record format and how they pieced their stories, their works together in a great sequence that really makes all of these albums classics today. I want to throw a concept out there that I've been thinking about. For all of these classic albums, I think they all have what I'm going to call tentpole songs. Tentpole songs, what are they? They are the important songs that kind of hold up and support the album as a whole. They are the foundational building blocks of the album. They're very important. Without those tentpole songs, the albums that I'm going to talk about just would not be the same. They wouldn't be the classics today without these critical tentpole songs. In 1970, we got the final album from boyhood friends Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Now, this album, when you think about the closing song on the album, I always thought the title track should have been the last song. I suppose I can see the argument whereby they decided to lead off the album with Bridge Over Troubled Water, the title track. This is the fantastic cover shot. Paul Simon partially blocking Artie there in the back. And I kind of love the muted grays and browns of this album with that little pop of color on the title. You know, talking about the power of record albums, my parents had this album when I was a kid, and I've talked about this before on my channel, but this is one of the first albums where I pored over the liner notes. I looked at the lyrics. I sang along. And I really kind of came to know this album, and it's really stuck with me ever since. This is really an important album to me. And so important that I actually sought out. I've got the Classic Records pressing of this. It sounds amazing. Of course, on the Columbia 2i is how they reproduced it. Let's talk about some of the tentpole songs on this album. Obviously, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Bridge Over Troubled Water, the song, was, it won the Grammy for Song of the Year, Record of the Year, probably in, I think, 1971. The album came out in January of 1970. I think the second tentpole song for the album is the closing song on side 1, So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright. This is a song that Paul Simon wrote looking kind of fondly back on the career of the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, but also knowing that Art Garfunkel originally wanted to be an architect. And there is a kind of foreshadowing. He's not only talking about Frank Lloyd Wright, he's talking about, his songwriting partner for years, Art Garfunkel. And I think both of these guys knew that the kind of writing was on the wall with this album. Garfunkel had gone off to film Catch-22 with Mike Nichols directing. And instead of kind of waiting around with Paul, waiting for Paul to kind of finish the writing of the album like they typically would do, Garfunkel went ahead and took the opportunity to kind of kickstart an acting career. So Paul wrote this song kind of knowing that, and also kind of knowing that their time was kind of up as a duo. In fact, at the end of the song, at the end of So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright, you actually hear the engineer, Roy Haley, longtime engineer for Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, all the way up into his solo projects, their solo projects. You hear So Long, Artie, already, and that was Roy Haley in the background. You can faintly hear it as the song fades out. So definitely not only about Frank Lloyd Wright. Just look at the last verse on So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright. So long, Frank Lloyd Wright. All of the nights we'd harmonize till dawn. I never laughed so long, so long, so long. Okay, the third tentpole song on this album is definitely The Boxer. Leads off side 2. So after The Listener kind of has that downbeat, somber song, The Boxer is an incredible song. It was released as a single. I read that Paul Simon said it was one of the most difficult songs that they had recorded. They started recording it, I believe, in Nashville. They eventually finished in New York. But The Boxer is an incredible Simon and Garfunkel song. The third song on side 2 is also Paul Simon talking about Art Garfunkel. Right from the beginning, right in the very first verse. Tom, get your plane right on time. I know your part'll go fine. Fly down to Mexico. And here I am, the only living boy in New York. So Paul Simon was kind of lonesome. He was actually missing Art Garfunkel. Art Garfunkel had flown to Mexico to start the filming of Catch-22. The final track on Bridge Over Troubled Water is Song for the Asking, a gorgeous, short song, but it has a hopeful tinge to it. And, there might be something in there signifying from Paul Simon to Art Garfunkel, hey, maybe we'll get together again and do this again sometime. That could be a stretch, but that's what I'm taking from it. But that is Bridge Over Troubled Water. In 1973, Pete Townshend and The Who put out arguably what is looked back at today as their best album. I'm talking about Quadrophenia, a double LP with lots of ideas, lots of soundscapes, and an interwoven story about the mods in Brighton, England. And over the 4 sides of music, we kind of come to know the story gradually. But in addition to the 4 sides of music, we have a long essay on the inner sleeve of this fantastic gatefold LP. But we also have a gorgeous book that was included in the album. So along with the music, we get all of these beautiful photographs that help tell the tale of Quadrophenia. The tentpole songs on Quadrophenia, in my opinion, are track 1, side 1, I Am the Sea. Track 2, Side 1, The Real Me. Track 5 on Side 1, The Punk Meets The Godfather. Side 2, last song on Side 2, I've Had Enough. Side 3, 515, and Drowned, which is the third song on Side 3. And then finally, on Side 4, the penultimate song for this double album is Love Reign Over Me. Those songs that I mentioned are critically important to telling the story that Pete Townshend had in mind with Quadrophenia. A double album, Quadrophenia by The Who, 1973. Classic album as art form, number 3. And by the way, these are in no specific order. I'm not ranking these things. I'm just talking about 10 important albums that really demonstrate the album as a 20th century and onwards art form. That would be 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. I suppose one could argue, love that replicated tip-on sleeve. This is the 2014 mono reissue. One could argue that all of these songs are tentpole songs. But I'll go ahead and highlight what I think are absolutely critical that must be on this album for it to be known as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Well, first of all, we have to have the first song on track 1, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's setting out the entire thesis of the album, what this album is about, right? The second track that has to be on this album is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That's track 3, side 1. The third tentpole song of this album is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. This just kind of perpetuates the story that's being told about this imaginary band. And that is the closing song on side 1. On side 2, the most important songs on the album are George Harrison's Within You, Without You, When I'm 64, track 2, side 2, and then probably the greatest closing song on any album of all time, and that of course is A Day in the Life. What an epic song. I would argue there's 3 parts of this song. We have the John Lennon part 1, we have the McCartney part 2, and then we have part 3, the closing orchestration. Just an incredible piece of work. That's classic album number 3, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. On July 9th, 1995, the Grateful Dead played their last show, which would become their last show with Jerry Garcia, at Soldier Field in Chicago. I saw the Grateful Dead with Jerry twice at Soldier Field in 90 and 91, I think. It was a long time ago. And one of 2 encores that the band played was Black Muddy River. Black Muddy River is the closing song on the huge comeback album from 1987 that is In the Dark. Of course, you know, this include Throwing Stones, Hell in a Bucket, the incredible phenomenon that was Touch of Grey, and then also that closing track, Black Muddy River. Robert Hunter penned gorgeous ballad. And listening back to that song now, that live version that you can find on YouTube from July 9th, 1995, it's an eerie eerie thing. You kind of have the feeling that Garcia maybe knew that this was it. He died just barely about a month later after that final concert at a treatment center in Marin County. And this is a fantastic album by the Grateful Dead. There's a little bit of 80s production on here that doesn't age entirely well, but Black Muddy River definitely stands up. And check out the lyrics sometime. It's a fantastic Robert Hunter song. Garcia has a very nice, tasty guitar solo in the middle of the song. No, you're not imagining things. I'm wearing a different shirt. It's a different day. This concept turned into... It stretched a little bit further than I had anticipated. So anyway, the good news is the album continues to thrive as we move out of the 20th century and into the 21st century. Case in point, I want to talk about an album that was released in 2002 from a power trio originally from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I actually think at least two of the founding members are still living in Oklahoma City. I'm talking about the Flaming Lips and the incredible mind trip that is Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. Again, released in 2002. This thing is an incredible piece of work. The soundscapes on this thing are absolutely amazing. The Flaming Lips kind of put it into fourth gear after the Soft Bulletin, which came in 1999. In 2002, how do we classify the sound on this album? I would say it was a mix between Pink Floyd, Radiohead, with a little bit of Brian Wilson and a little bit of On the Beach era Neil Young, forming a neo-psych space rock stew. The album also sounds incredible. I have a pressing that was mastered by Chris Bellman on 180 gram vinyl. There's a look at the label. This album, together with the Soft Bulletin, really kind of thrust the Flaming Lips, who were kind of a fringe alternative rock band, in big time into the mainstream. I think Wayne Coyne has been featured in at least two commercials that I can recall. One featuring the standout song on this album, Do You Realize? ? And that's definitely a tentpole song on this album. Now, the other ones that I want to mention that just lift this thing up into the stratosphere is sound, as far as a cohesive piece of work, and this was not a concept album, and that's straight from Wayne Coyne. My other tentpole songs: Fight Test, Track 1, Side 1, Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots, Part 1, In the Morning of the Magicians, an amazing psych folk song. It's got an incredible shimmering sound to it. Leading off side 2, Ego Tripping at the Gates of Hell, followed by Are You a Hypnotist? Another double question mark at the end of that song title. Do You Realize? And then the closing song, which is an instrumental, which actually won the 2003 Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental. That song is titled Utopia Planeta. check out the long title. I can't even pronounce it, so I'm not going to try and butcher it right now. But that is Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. This is an amazing piece of work. For best effects, I recommend listening to this album in one sitting. Speaking of Neil Young, I had to include one Neil Young album, at least one. And what I decided to go with here, as far as a cohesive album, a time and a place, is 1974's outstanding album, On the Beach. There is the evocative cover. Neil somewhere near Zuma Beach, looking out into the Pacific. We have a buried 1950s flared car fender and some cheap beach furniture, along with a newspaper there in the sand calling for Nixon to resign. There's nothing unambiguous about this album. This thing, Neil wears his heart on his sleeve, and it is studded with some fantastic songs. Many of them are blues, not only in title. Side one, first of all, we have the upbeat Walk On. Neil, of course, is doing some amazing playing on the Gretsch White Falcon. If you ever see him in concert, and if he ever does play Walk On, that's the guitar that he will use. Other tentpole songs on this: Revolution Blues, For the Turnstiles, Vampire Blues, closing side one. The epic title track actually leads off side two, clocking in at over 7 minutes long, On the Beach. And then we have Ambulance Blues, 8.5 minutes long, closing this incredible album. Of course, that was on the Reprise label. There it is. Now, if you don't know the story, On the Beach is actually the second album of three that people tend to call the Ditch albums. So there was a famous quote that Neil said later. I think it was actually in the liner notes of Decade. And, after the incredible success of Harvest with the breakout single Heart of Gold, Neil went a different direction. He didn't want to have all this mainstream acclaim, and he decided to put out a live album that didn't feature any of the Harvest songs on it, followed up by On the Beach. On the Beach is a melancholy, somber album with a little bit of optimism here and there, a little bit of sunshine shining through, especially on track one, Walk On. That is On the Beach, 1974, an epic album from Neil Young. In 1993, we were at the absolute height of the grunge movement. I was actually, I had left Chicago in 1992, moved to the Los Angeles area, and I remember I was living in Glendale in the San Fernando Valley in July of 1993 when I kept hearing about this band back in Chicago, Smashing Pumpkins. And they released Siamese Dream in July of 93. I eventually moved back to Chicago. Things didn't pan out exactly how I was hoping, and went back to Chicago, I think it was October of 1993. And, back in that summer in Glendale, I picked up a copy of Billboard magazine, and there was a cover story saying that Chicago was the next cutting-edge capital of rock and roll, and they were talking about Liz Phair, Smashing Pumpkins, Material Issue, of course, Urge Overkill. There was just a ton of stuff happening in Chicago, and this is an incredible piece of work. it still stands up today as one of the best grunge era albums. I am lucky enough to have found an original repress, which happened in late 1994. You know, these were originally issued on 4 different color variants, and this was the first black vinyl reissue in a gatefold. This was spread across 233 RPM records. I will tell you right now that every song on this album is what I'm calling a tentpole song. This album would not be what it is today without those songs in that running order. Everything from Today to Disarm to Cherub Rock to Mayonnaise. This is just an incredible piece of work. And it was definitely going to make my video today for you know, talking about the album as art form. Pleased to see that Smashing Pumpkins are touring again this year. Going to have to seriously think about maybe catching them in Denver in the fall. My touring budget is already kind of through the roof, so not sure if that's going to happen, but this is an incredible piece of work. Released in 1986, I guess we could call this mid-period Van. This was no guru, no method, no teacher. This is an amazing, contemplative, reflective album. Really, really, really nice music on here. The instrumentation is just fantastic. Separation of instruments on this thing is amazing. There is everything from kind of a rocked up Ivory Tower, the closing song on the album, which is definitely what I'm calling a tentpole song, to the strings on Tir Na Nog, which is the first song on side 2. There's quite a bit of spirituality in here. The first song kicks off the album, Got to Go Back. Again, that reflective looking back is a central theme on this. And now one of the classics on this thing is In the Garden. In the Garden is something that Van still plays in concert frequently, and it is a gorgeous song. It is the last song on side 1, definitely a tentpole song. This came out on the Mercury label, and I don't see it very often in the bins out there, so it's not really easy to find. I actually had to pick this up off of Discogs, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, mid-period, you know, Van is just releasing a new album, I think, this past Friday. So I guess we have to call this mid-period Van Morrison. It is one of his stronger albums from the 1980s, released in 1986. No guru, no method, no teacher. Released in May 1966, Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, the incredible double album. It took him and various musicians the better part of 5 months to record this piece of work. Compare that to Highway 61. Dylan had knocked out Highway 61 in 6 days in the studios. So Blonde on Blonde, much more time, much more effort. Dylan would be finishing songs in the studio. This was recorded, of course, in the famous Studio A, Columbia Studios in New York City, along with sessions that took place on Music Row in Nashville. And this has got to be a desert island disc for me, so much so that I had to splurge and get the double 45 RPM one step. This thing is absolutely incredible sounding. You know, this album is kind of the culmination, the high point of what people would call the wild, thin Mercury sound. Very, very raw, with some distortion on these recordings. A lot of drive, a lot of punch. This is an incredible piece of work. I'm going to kind of break my rules again, and instead of cherry picking, the foundational pieces as far as the songs on this album, which are the tent poles, I'm just going to say they all are necessary as far as this body of work is concerned. Leading off with Rainy Day Women, number 12 and 35. People put that on and they couldn't figure out what was going on, this jug band sound. The band obviously under the influence when it was recorded in Nashville. Pig Robbins is playing piano on this, and he said as much in interviews. Come on. Visions of Johanna, I Want You, Stuck Inside of Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, Just Like a Woman, Most Likely You Go Your Way and I'll Go Mine, Fourth Time Around, Absolutely Sweet Marie, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. This is an essential album that everyone should have in their collection. Go find our first or second pressing on the Columbia label, and you will enjoy that sound, whether it's in mono or stereo. Look for both. Compare, contrast. Blonde on Blonde, Bob Dylan, 1966. I think it was July of 1985. I was home from college in Michigan at my parents' house. And I remember hearing about this huge concert that was going to be an all-day thing. And I remember watching most of it that day and just kind of awestruck by all the performances, all the bands, the variety of bands that were involved. One of my favorite performances from that day was the Cars. And they were good timing. They were actually touring behind Heartbeat City, and they played. I think they played 3 songs from this album during that short set. Now, this was a huge hit for the Cars, and it was recorded really, really well, mastered by Bob Ludwig at Masterdisc. It's a snapshot of the mid-'80s. And of course, David Robinson, the drummer, was also responsible for kind of curating the covers and determining the artwork. He was involved again on this. This is a fantastic package. The title track is one of the most evocative slices of electro pop that you will ever hear. It is an amazing song, and it was actually miscredited on the early pressings. It was actually titled Jackie, who the song is about. If we need to point to tentpole songs that constitute this album and make this album what it is, I think we have to look at Looking for Love, which is a low-key, not really talked about song, but it is an amazing, it's pop perfection. Magic, of course, Drive, with that great lead vocal from Ben Orr. You Might Think, huge MTV hit. Why Can't I Have You, a great ballad. And then finally, the closing track, Heartbeat City. This is just an incredible album from the Cars. There would be, before they reconvened in 2012, there would be one more album, Door to Door, before they kind of departed as a group. Ben Orr eventually died of cancer, unfortunately. But do check out, I'm hoping that will be a record store release. I would like to see the 2012 reunion album released on vinyl. It may have come out in Europe but it is very, very hard to find. Great CD, but I'm skipping ahead. This is just a fantastic body of work. This is Heartbeat City, 1984, The Cars. That's it. I think I'm done. I could keep on going, but I just wanted to kind of highlight 10 great examples of the album as a 20th century art form, originally conceived in the 20th century, still thriving today in 2022. Those were 10 of my favorites. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, please subscribe, and it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I will be back soon with a new video.